Um, anyway, Europeans were making some headway, visiting New World, visiting new places. Portugal got control of the spice trade. There was a problem, though, that Portugal had. If you look on the map, Portugal's a small country, did not have the population and did not have the wealth to really control the lands that they found. They conquered, or claimed they conquered, all of the western shoreline of Africa, and as recently as 1960, when I was a kid, they still had a few of those places, including Angola, but slowly they lost their shoreline empire. They lost a lot of control of Africa because they were too small to hold on to it. But which brings us up, though, to a bigger country, Spain. Spain spent about 800 years fighting off a group of Muslims called the Moors. The Muslims had made inroads into Spain in about the year 700 or 800 CE when they had conquered. Now, they never conquered all of Spain, but they conquered much of it. And the Spanish were to spend the next, like I say, 700 years fighting them. And in the year 1492, and this is one year I want you to remember, for two events. In 1492, Spain got rid of the last of its Muslims, or its Moors. Sent them all to live in Morocco or across the Mediterranean. Got rid of the Moors. And of course, the other reason, remember that year, that was the year that Columbus sailed with his 3 ships. But anyway, Spain at this time consisted of 2 countries. Don't worry about them. They were Castile and Aragon. Well, Castile was ruled by a queen named Isabella, and Aragon came to be ruled by a queen, and they got the brilliant idea, hey, if we marry, we can pass the United Kingdom on to our son. So Ferdinand and Isabella married. Isabella's kingdom was a little bit bigger than Ferdinand's, which meant, of course, among other things, that Isabella could do anything she wanted to with her kingdom, and Ferdinand would not object. But they united together long enough to fight the Moors, and united, they drove out to last the Moors, and by the middle of 1492, the last of the Moors were defeated and sent packing to North Africa. And in the meantime, into the scenario comes a man named Christopher Columbus. Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but when I was 10 years old, our 5th grade teacher got all of us in the courtroom one at a time and asked us who discovered America. And of 100 5th graders, 20 of us didn't know that. Again, I know if I can look around the room and see a bunch of you are from varied and different backgrounds, so I'm not going to embarrass anybody, but I hope you'll have heard of this man or know about him. Christopher Columbus is the man that the European who's given credit for discovering America. And it's actually questionable. Well, there's a lot of things about him that's really questionable. Nevertheless, supposedly he was born in Genoa. You notice I said supposedly. The fact is, even that's open to question. The last time I researched the issue, there was this person on the web that was adamant, no matter what you may have heard, he was born in Genoa, Italy. We don't know anything at all about his boyhood. He had a couple of brothers, and nothing at all is known about their boyhood. Now, there's a book out, a book entitled Lies My Teacher Told Me, that tells us that Christopher Columbus actually may have been from an extremely wealthy family and possibly even royalty. How do we know this? Number one, he could go into the palace of kings and ask for favors. He first went to the king of Portugal and asked for a favor from him, didn't get it. Went to the king and queen of Spain and asked for a favor from them and eventually got it. But when he was actually on his way to talk to the King of France, what kind of man can go from one king's palace to another and get an audience with a king and request favors and get them? He was no humble, ordinary sea captain. Also, when he married, He married the adopted daughter of Henry the Navigator. Basically, he married into royalty. Now, before you, I could skip that part. I mean, he had a couple of illegitimate children. Everybody is asking, well, why did he marry this woman by whom he had the children? Well, she was not high enough, rich enough. But he married an orphaned girl who was an orphaned noblewoman who was brought up in the court of Henry the Navigator. So basically, he married into royalty. In 1490s, folks, you didn't marry into royalty unless you had some little blood in your veins yourself. Now, catch his close. There are persons who have said that they believe Christopher Columbus was part Jewish. Why do they think so? Queen Isabella had a Jew in her court, a converted Jew, a Jew who converted Christianity, who was her treasurer, an extremely wealthy man. And he was the one who persuaded her to give Columbus away money. Anyway, I'm going jumping around the story a little bit. I'll back up a bit. When Columbus, first of all, like I said, he was related to Henry the Navigator by his marriage. And it's known that he went to Henry. Henry said, go to my brother, the king. He went to King John of Portugal. King John secretly sent a shot. First of all, what he went for. Columbus said, Your Majesty, but we know the earth is round. And we can reach the far east, not by going around Africa, but by sailing straight west, and we can get to China without going around Africa and without having to contend with the Muslim war. We just go straight west and we'll arrive in China. Well, the King of Portugal sent out a ship. The captain went a few miles out, came back and said, I went there, Your Majesty, there's nothing out there. Apparently he didn't go far enough. When Columbus learned this, his feelings were hurt. He said, well, I'll go to the King and Queen of Spain. So he left Portugal and went to Spain and approached the court of Ferdinand and Isabella. I didn't write those names down, did I? I'm afraid of embarrassment. I'm just dying to know how many of you have heard this story before, but I won't ask for a show of hands, but I'm kind of dying to know. But anyway, you're hearing it now. Now, when I took this course as a senior, the textbook I used said this story is too well known to repeat here, and he wouldn't even repeat the story again because we've been told it so many times already. Anyway, he went to the court of Ferdinand and Isabella. Ferdinand, like all kings of Europe, he had a college that he kept, and his college was staffed by a bunch of most educated men of Europe at the time. The doctors at his university said, yes, Your Majesty, it's true, the world is round. We don't doubt that, but we think that it's 10,000 miles to China. And therefore, any crew that you outfit will die of thirst or die of starvation before they get to China, because they can't carry enough water and enough food to last a 10,000 mile voyage. So Ferdinand wasn't willing to help. He went to Isabella, and Isabella did the same thing, consulted with her advisors, and she wasn't willing to help either. Somewhat discouraged, Columbus mounted a horse and headed for Paris for the King of France. But in the meantime, Isabella had, like I say, she had a Jewish advisor, her treasurer, who was a converted Jew. And he said, listen, I'll pay for the voyage out of my own pockets. I'm rich enough. Why don't you call Columbus back and tell him you agree? So Isabella sent a man with a fast horse. This man overtook Columbus and said, Columbus, turn back, Your Majesty. Her Majesty wants to talk to you. Columbus went back. Isabella had him out. By this time, too, Ferdinand and Isabella had just won their war against the Moors, so they were more free to free up some ships. Anyway, Isabella had him outfitted with 3 small ships, the Santa Maria, the Nina, and the Pinta. Again, all this is stuff I learned as a child, but I'm not going to have to show it. But anyway, 3 ships. They were old and almost just barely seaworthy. But Columbus had them worked on. His first move was the Canary Islands, because once he got on the water, he realized, hey, these ships won't last on a long voyage to China. So he went to the Canary Islands and had them repaired, refurbished, upgraded a little bit. Then he had his men sail straight west. And they sailed for about 3 months. And there was all kinds of stories that Columbus's sailors were afraid of jumping off the end of the, falling off the end of the earth because the earth was flat. We know this to be today to be hogwash. Everybody every person at that time knew the earth was round and it had no quote unquote end to it. They were afraid of sea monsters. That's another story. I mean, sea monsters, you can believe what you want to. There are, the giant squid is now known to be 60 foot long, and it does exist, and we don't know where it lives. But there are stories of the great sea serpent that's frightened off our motorboats, so we don't see it anymore. But the sailboats. But anyway, there have been thousands of persons who supposedly have sighted it. But the sea monsters, sea serpents, they were afraid of. Columbus still had them sail on until one day the man into the crow's nest in the upper, I mean, if you know anything about those old sailing ships, they had on the top mast an area called the crow's nest where you had to use the rigging to climb up the top, and it must have been scary because as the ship waved back and forth, you took a ride. I mean, it wasn't for the faint of heart, it wasn't for the persons to get easy, who got easily seasick either. But someone in a crow's nest one night said, "I see a light off toward the southwest." Today we know he couldn't have, but nevertheless he thought he did. So Columbus had his ship head for the southwest. They began to see birds, something you would not see unless you were close to land. They began to see branches and twigs floating on the water, again, something you would not see in the ocean. They began to be, we must be nearing land. And then find another man in a crow's nest. Hey, this is trivia. The man's name was Triana. The reason I remember I roomed with a man named Triana was in the army. And he claimed to be a descendant of the original Triana who was with Columbus. Just a little bit of trivia I thought I'd throw in. Anyway, a man named Triana spotted the land. Columbus approached, had the lifeboats lowered, went across. I mean, he didn't bring his ships close enough to land at the rocks near the land, but took the lifeboats and said a prayer of thanks and said, "I take possession of this land in the name of the King and Queen of Spain." He named the place San Salvador. Now, for the next 450 years, we did not know where San Salvador was. We did not know the route Columbus took. But today, thanks to the aid of computers and archaeological discoveries, we think we have found San Salvador. We know where Columbus landed. We found artifacts there. Anyway, Columbus landed in San Salvador. The natives approached him, and they seemed to be really friendly. He called them Indians because he believed he was in the East Indies Islands. He knew he was on an island. So the name stuck. And again, he began to wonder, well, what about the wealth that Marco Polo talked about? He didn't see it. Now, here's